A Daughter of the Samurai. Chapter 20. Neighbours. When I came to America, I expected to learn many things, but I had no thought that I was going to learn anything about Japan. Yet our neighbours, by their questions and remarks, were teaching me every day new ways of looking at my own country. My closest friend was the daughter of a retired statesman, the General, we called him, who lived just across the steep little ravine which divided our grounds from his. Our side was bordered by a hedge of purple lilacs, broken, opposite the path to the well, by a rustic drawbridge. One autumn afternoon I was sitting on the shady step of the bridge with a many-stamped package in my lap, waiting for the postman. Just about that hour his funny little wagon, looking with its open side doors like a high, stiff cargo, would be passing on its return trip down the hill, and I was anxious to hurry off my package of white cotton brocade and ribbons of various patterns and colours, the most prized gifts I could send to Japan. Suddenly I heard a gay voice behind me, reciting in a high sing-song, "Open your mouth and shut your eyes, and I'll give you something to make you wise." I looked up at a charming picture. My bright-eyed friend in the white dress and big lacy hat was standing on the bridge, holding in her cupped hands 3 or 4 grape leaves pinned together with thorns. On this rustic plate were piled some bunches of luscious purple grapes. "Oh, how pretty!" I exclaimed. "That is just the way Japanese serve fruit." "And this is the way they carry flowers?" she said, putting down the grapes on the step and releasing a big bunch of long-stemmed tiger lilies from under her arm. "Why do Japanese always carry flowers upside down?" I laughed and said, "It looked very odd to me when I first came to see everybody carrying flowers with the tops up. Why do you?" "Why? Why? They look prettier so, and that's the way they grow." That was true, and yet I had never before thought of anyone's caring for the appearance of flowers that were being carried. We Japanese have a way of considering a thing invisible until it's settled in its proper place. "Japanese seldom carry flowers," I said, "except to the temple or to graves. We get flowers for the house from flower vendors who go from door to door with baskets swung from shoulder poles, but we do not send flowers as gifts, and we never wear them." "Why?" asked Miss Helen. "Because they wither and fade, and so to send flowers to a sick friend would be the worst omen in the world." "Oh, what a lot of pleasure your poor invalids in hospitals are losing," said Miss Helen, "and Japan is the land of flowers." Surprised and thoughtful, I sat silent, but in a moment was aroused by a question. "What were you thinking of when I came, sitting here so quietly with that big bundle on your lap? You looked like a lovely, dainty, picturesque little peddler." "My thoughts were very unlike those of a peddler," I replied. "As I sat here watching the dangling end of the bridge chain, I was thinking of a Japanese lover of long ago who crossed a drawbridge 99 times to win his lady love, and the 100th time, in a blinding snowstorm, he failed to see that it was lifted, and he fell to his death in the moat below." "How tragic!" exclaimed Miss Helen. "What did the poor lady do?" "It was her fault," I said. "She was vain and ambitious, and when she saw a chance to win the love of a high official at court, She changed her mind about her lover and commanded her attendants not to lower the bridge the day he expected to come triumphant. You don't mean that the cold-blooded creature actually planned his death? It was the storm that caused his death, I said. She was fickle, but not wicked. She thought that when he found the bridge lifted, he would know her answer and go away. Well, sometimes our girls over here are fickle enough, dear knows, said Miss Helen, but no American woman would ever do a thing like that. She was actually a murderess. I was shocked at such a practical way at looking at my romantic tale, and hastened to add that remorseful Lady Komachi became a nun and spent her life in making pilgrimages to various temples to pray for the dead. At last she partially lost her mind, and as a wandering beggar lived and died amongst the humble villages on the slopes of Mount Fuji. Her fate is held up by priests, I concluded, as a warning to all fickle-minded maidens. Well, said Miss Helen, drawing a deep breath, I think she paid pretty dearly for her foolishness, don't you? Why, well, perhaps, I replied, rather surprised at the question. But we are taught that if a woman so loses her gentle modesty that she can treat with scorn and disrespect the plea of a loyal lover, she is no longer a worthy woman. Suppose a man jilts a maid, what then? Quickly asked Miss Helen. Is he no longer considered a worthy man? I did not know how to reply. Instinctively, I upheld to myself the teachings of my childhood that man is the protector and guide and woman the helper, the self-respecting but nevertheless uncritical, dutiful helper. Often afterward, Miss Helen and I had heart-to-heart talks in which her questions and remarks surprised and sometimes disturbed me. Many of our customs I had taken for granted, accepting the ways of our ancestors without any thought except that thus they had been and still were. When I began to question myself about things which had always seemed simple and right because they were in accordance with laws made by our wise rulers, sometimes I was puzzled and sometimes I was frightened. I am afraid that I am growing very bold and manlike, I would think to myself, but God gave me a brain to use, else why do I have it? All my childhood I had hidden my deepest feelings. Now again it was the same. My American mother would have understood, but I did not know, and so, repressing all outward signs, I puzzled my way alone, in search of higher ideals, not for myself, but for Japan. Miss Helen's father was 93 years old when I knew him. He was a wonderful man, tall with broad shoulders, just a trifle stooped, and with thick iron grey hair and bushy eyebrows. A strong face he had, but gentle and humorous when he talked. I looked upon him as an encyclopedia of American history. I had always loved the study of history, in childhood and at school, but I had learned little of the details of America's part in the world, and would sit with the General and his invalid wife, listening by the hour, while he told stories of early American life. Knowing that incidents of personal history especially appealed to me, he once told me that his own large estate was bought by his father from an Indian chief in exchange for one chair, a gun, and a pouch of tobacco, and that mother's large home was once an Indian village of bark tents and was purchased for 6 split-seated kitchen chairs. These incidents seemed to me almost prehistoric, for I had never known anyone whose home did not date back into a far past. When America was a still youthful nation, the General had represented his country as a diplomat in Europe, and, with his beautiful young wife, had taken part in the foreign social life in Paris and later in Washington. My first glimpse of American life abroad I received through the word pictures of this gracious lady, and through her experiences I began to understand with sympathy something of the problem in Japan, of the Americans trying to understand the Japanese, which heretofore I had looked upon only as a problem of Japanese trying to understand Americans. From childhood until I met the general, the word ancient had commanded my reverence. I had been conscious that the Inagaki family tree was rooted in a history centuries old, and that our plots in the cemetery were the oldest in Nagaoka. It had seemed an unquestioned necessity that we should follow the same customs that our ancestors had observed for hundreds of years, and it was my pride that they were the customs of a dynasty which was among the very oldest in the world. After I became acquainted with the general and heard him talk of the wonderful development of a nation much younger than my own family tree, the word ancient lost some of its value. Even the general's own lifetime, the years of only one man's life, represented such a marvelous advance in national growth that sometimes I looked upon him almost with awe, wondering how much real value should be attached to antiquity. Perhaps, I sometimes said to myself, it would be better not to look back with such pride to a glorious past, but instead look forward to a glorious future. One means quiet satisfaction, the other ambitious work. One evening after Matsuo and I had been over to call on the general, Miss Helen walked back with us across the drawbridge. Matsuo went on to join Mother on the porch, and Miss Helen and I sat down on the steps of the bridge, as we often did, to talk. "When Father told us that story about Molly Pitcher," said Miss Helen, "I wondered if you were thinking about Japanese women." "Why?" I asked. "Well," she replied hesitatingly, "several times I've heard you say that American women are like Japanese. I don't see that Molly Pitcher is much of a Japanese specimen." "Oh, you don't know Japanese history," I exclaimed. "We have many women heroes in Japan." "Yes, of course," said Miss Helen quickly. "In every country there are heroic women who rise to noble sacrifice on occasion, but there are exceptions. Books and travelers all speak of Japanese women as being quiet, soft-spoken, gentle, and meek. That picture doesn't apply to the American type of woman." "The training is different," I said, "but I think that at the heart they are much the same." "Well," said Miss Helen, "when it becomes the fashion for us to wear our hearts on our sleeves, perhaps we will appear gentle and meek. But," she added as she rose to go, "I don't believe that Japanese men think as you do. Tonight, when I spoke of the book on Japan that I have been reading and said that I believed the author was right when he declared that for modesty and gentle worth Japanese women lead the world, your husband smiled and said, 'Thank you,' as if he thought so too." "Miss Helen," I said earnestly, "although our women are pictured as gentle and meek, and although Japanese men will not contradict it, nevertheless it is true that beneath all the gentle meekness, Japanese women are like volcanoes." Miss Helen laughed. "You are the only Japanese woman that I ever saw except at the exposition," she said, "and I cannot imagine you being like a volcano. However, I'll give in to your superior knowledge. You have had Molly Pitchers among your women, and flirts. That lady, what's her name, who you told me about the other day, she was a flirt with a vengeance. And now you say you have volcanoes? Your demure-appearing countrywomen seem to have surprising possibilities. Next time I come over, I'm going to challenge you to give me a specimen of a Japanese genuine woman's rights woman." "That is easy," I said, laughing in my turn. A genuine woman's rights woman is not one who wants her rights, but one who has them. And if that means the right to do men's work, I can easily give you a specimen. We have a whole island of women who do men's work, from planting rice to making laws. What do the men do? Cook, keep house, take care of children, and do the family washing. You don't mean it, exclaimed Miss Helen, and she sat down again. But I did mean it, and I told her of Hachijo, a little island about 100 miles off the coast of Japan. Here, the women, tall, handsome and straight, with their splendid hair coiled in an odd knot upon top of their head, and wearing long loose gowns, bound by a narrow sash tied in the front, work in the rice fields, make oil from camellia seeds, spin and weave a peculiar yellow silk which they carry in bundles on their heads over the mountains, at the same time driving tiny oxen not much larger than dogs, also laden with rolls of silk to be sent to the mainland to be sold. And in addition to all this, they make some of the best laws we have and see that they are properly carried out. In the meantime, the older men of the community, with babies strapped to their backs, go on errands or stand on the street gossiping and swaying to a sing-song lullaby, and the younger ones wash sweet potatoes, cut vegetables and cook dinner, or in big aprons and with sleeves looped back, splash, rub and wring out clothes at the edge of a stream. The beginning of this unusual state of things dates back several centuries to a time when the husbands and sons were forced to go to another island about 40 miles away for fishing, very little of which could be done near Hachijo. When silk proved more profitable than fish, the men returned to the island, but the government was in capable hands, which have never given up their hold. I told all of this to Miss Helen, and closed by saying, "A subject for your meditation is the fact that with these women, rulers, both men and women are happy and healthy. The social life there is more strictly moral than it is in other community of equal intelligence in Japan." "You had better join the equal suffrage party," said Miss Helen, "and go on the lecture platform with that story. It has a list towards moral uplift and might win voters for the cause. Well, your women are such unexpected creatures that I am more than ever convinced that American women are not like Japanese. We talk so much and are so noisily interested in public affairs that we're expected to do almost anything. Whatever happens, we cannot surprise the world, but for one of your timid, shrinking kind suddenly to burst out into a bold, strong act, like lifting drawbridges and that sort of thing, completely upsets our preconceived ideas. And then to hear of its being quietly but effectively done en masse, like those island women, is rather disconcerting." She ran over the bridge, calling back, "Anyway, although you are the sweetest little lady that ever walked on sandals, you haven't convinced me. American women are not like Japanese women. More's the pity." With this absurd compliment from my extravagantly partial friend ringing in my ears, I started to walk towards the porch, when suddenly a voice called from the dusky shadows across the bridge, "Oh, I didn't think of Miss Newton. I'll give up. She is like a Japanese woman. Good night." I smiled as I walked on towards the porch, for I was thinking of something Mother had told me that very morning about Mrs. Newton. She was our nearest neighbour on the opposite side of our place from Miss Helen's home, and I knew her very well. She was a gentlewoman, soft-voiced and shy, who loved birds and had little box houses for them in her trees. I understood why Miss Helen should say that she was like a Japanese woman, but I had never thought that she was. Her ideas were so very sensible and practical, and she allowed her husband to be too attentive to her. He carried her cloak and umbrella for her, and once in the carriage I saw him lean over and fasten her slipper strap. What Mother had told me was that a few days before, Mrs. Newton was sitting by the window sewing when she heard a frightened chirping and saw a large snake reaching up the trunk of a tree to one of her bird boxes on a low branch. She dropped her sewing and, running to a drawer where her husband kept a gun, she shot through the open window right into the snake's head, and her little bird family was saved. How could she do it? I said to Mother. I never would have believed that frail, delicate Mrs. Newton would dare even touch a gun. She is afraid of every dog on the street, and she starts and flushes if you speak to her unexpectedly. And then, anyway, how could she ever hit it? Mother smiled. Mrs. Newton can do many things that you don't know about, she said. When she was first married, she lived for several years on a lonely ranch out west. One stormy night when her husband was gone, she strapped that same gun around her waist and walked 6 miles through darkness and danger to bring help to an injured workman. I recalled Mrs. Newton's soft voice and gentle, almost timid manner. After all, I said to myself, she is like a Japanese woman. Chapter 21. New Experiences. As the weeks and the months had drifted by, unconsciously in my mind the present had been linking itself more and more closely with the past, for I had been learning more clearly each day that America was very like Japan. Thus, as time passed, the new surroundings melted into old memories, and I began to feel that my life had been almost an unbroken continuation from childhood until now. Beneath the chimes of the church bells calling, "Do not forget to thank for gifts you every day enjoy," I could hear the mellow boom of the temple gong. Protection for all is offered here. Safety is within. The children who, with their burden of books, filled the streets with laughter and shouts at 8:30 a.m., made the same picture to me as our crowds of boys in uniform and girls in pleated skirts and shining black hair, who at 7:30 a.m. clattered along on wooden clogs, carrying their books neatly wrapped in squares of patterned challis. Valentine's Day, with its lacy scenes of bowing knights and burning hearts, all twined about with ropes of rosebuds and with sweet thoughts expressed in glowing, endearing words, was our weaving festival, when swaying bamboos were decorated with festoons of gay sashes and scarfs and hung with glittering poem prayers for sunshine, that the herdsman and his weaver wife might meet that day on the misty bank of the heavenly river, which Americans call the Milky Way. Decoration Day, with its soldiers of 2 wars, with its patriotic speeches and its graves with tiny flags and scattered blossoms, was our shokoncha, memorial to our soldier dead, when all day long hundreds marched through the great stone arch to bow with softly clapping hands, then march away to make room for hundreds more. The 4th of July, with its fluttering flags, with snapping crackers, with beating drums, and its whirling, shooting rockets in the sky, was our holiday, on which the flag of Japan waved beneath crossed cherry branches in honor of the coming to the throne, 25 centuries ago, of our first emperor, a large bearded man in loose garments, tied at the wrist and ankle with twisted vines, and wearing a long swinging necklace of sickle-shaped gems, which is today one of the 3 treasures of the throne. Halloween, with its grotesque lanterns, its witches and many jokes, was the harvest festival of Japan, when pumpkins were skillfully scraped into lovely pictures of shady gardens with lanterns and flowers, when ghost games were played and pumpkins piled at the gate of round-faced maidens, and when orchards of the stingy man were raided and their trophies laid on the graves for the poor to find. Thanksgiving, the homecoming day with its turkey and pie and jolly good cheer, was our anniversary when married sons and daughters with their children gathered for a feast of red rice and whole fish, gossiping happily while they ate, with the shrine doors open wide and the spirits of kindly ancestors watching over all. Christmas, with its gay streets and merry, hurrying, bundle-laden crowds, with its sparkling tree and many gifts, with its holy memories of shining star and a mother with her babe, was something like our 7 days of New Year's rejoicing, but with a difference. The difference between the soft organ tones of an old melody and the careless, lilting song of a happy child. At New Year's time, above every doorway in our crowded streets was stretched a rope of ragged rice straw with pine trees growing on either side, and the air resounded with children's laughter and the tinkle of tiny hidden bells in running shoes, with the gay tap-tap of flying shuttlecocks and the cheerful greetings of bowing friends. In every home were thick rounded cakes of mochi. Every babe had another birthday, every maiden had a new sash, and poetry cards were played by boys and girls together. Oh, it was gay in Japan at New Year's time. There was no thought of solemnity anywhere, for the chrysalis of the past was broken, the butterfly had burst forth, and the world had begun again. My first Christmas Day in America was a disappointment. We were all invited by a lady friend to attend Christmas services and afterward go home with her to dinner and to see her tree. She had children, and I had pictured a scene as being gay, pretty, and pleasant, but with an undercurrent of dignity and reverence. I had idealized too much about the wide influence of the symbolism of the day, and everything seemed such a strange combination of the spiritual and the material that I was lost. The star on the tree and the thought of unselfish giving were beautiful, but little was said of either except in church, and just beneath the star were festoons of popcorn and cranberries, things we eat. Indeed, except for the gaiety of giving and receiving gifts, most things, especially belonged to the day, seemed only the serving of certain kinds of food and the very inartistic and peculiar custom of hanging in a prominent place the garments of the lowest part of the body for the purpose of holding gifts of toys and jewelry, or even candy and fruit. That was a little difficult for a Japanese to understand. That evening, Mother and I went over to call on Miss Helen, and there in her big quiet parlour, spreading over a large snowy cloth on the floor, stood her tree, large and pine-scented, sparkling with lights and coloured swinging ornaments. It was wonderful. The tree, though so big and beautiful, reminded me as an American skyscraper might remind one of a tiny temple pagoda, of the fairy-like branch of our cocoon festival, from which swing and float, swaying with the lightest breath, myriads of fairy-like sugar-blown replicas of every delicate symbol of the day. Miss Helen's father and mother were there, and we talked of the holidays of America and of Japan. Then a little niece and a neighbour's child sang Christmas carols, and my heart was full of joy, for I felt that my ideal Christmas had really come. The morning after Christmas, we had our first snow, a flying mist of dry, feathery flakes that was no more like the heavy fall of Etsuko's damp, solid clots than fluffy silk flosses like weighty cotton batting. All day long it fell, growing thicker towards nightfall, and when we awakened the next morning, the world was white. Just at the curve where our driveway turned into the broad public road stood the coachman's cottage. He had 3 children, and they asked Mother if they might make a snowman on our back lawn. Mother gave her consent, and then the most interesting things happened. The children rolled a big ball, then piled on it another, and on top of that a small one. Then, with much pushing and patting of red-mittened hands, they formed rude features and, with shiny bits of hard coal, gave the image a pair of bright eyes and a row of buttons down the front. An old hat of their father's and a pipe from somewhere completed their work. And there stood a clumsy, shapeless image that reminded me of Daruma-sama, the Indian saint whose devotion cost him his feet. I had never expected to see a Buddhist saint in America, but I greeted the likeness with merriment and entertained the children by telling them the story of the cheerful rice pounder who threw away his pestle to become the founder of a new religion, and who asked that his image be not honoured with reverential bows, but be made into an amusing toy that children's hands would use and children's hearts enjoy. Later on, I saw a Daruma-sama at other places than on our snowy lawn. To my surprise, the little squatting figure muffled in a scarlet cloak seemed to be a familiar object, but no one knew his story or his name. All my life I had been accustomed to seeing Daruma-sama in the shape of every toy that can be made for careless baby fingers, but I was really shocked one evening at a card party to find the little red rolling figure used as a booby prize. "It is such an odd selection for a card game prize," I said to Matsuo. "Why should a Daruma-sama be chosen?" "Not odd at all," replied Matsuo. "Very appropriate. A man so well balanced that, however he may fall, the next moment he is up again right side up, makes an excellent booby prize. It means down only for a moment, don't you see?" In Japan, we always treat a Daruma-sama rather disrespectfully, but it is a kind of affectionate disrespect, and my sensations as I walked home with Matsuo from the party were rather mixed. Finally, just as I reached the iron gate, I drew a long breath, and with a ridiculous feeling of loyalty and protection tugging at my heart, I surprised Matsuo by saying, "I wish that either you or I had won the booby prize." It was an unusual thing for snow to remain on the ground longer than a few days, but Mother laughingly declared that the American gods of the weather had evidently planned a special season in order to keep me from being homesick. At any rate, more snow fell, and still more, and we began to see sleighs go by, light carriage-like vehicles filled with laughing ladies in fur, with gay scarfs floating behind them as they flew by. It was like a scene from the theatre. How different from the deep snows of Etsuko, over which snow-booted men pulled heavy sledges, built for work, not for fun, chanting as they pulled a steady, rhythmic "En yara ya, en yara ya." I missed the purity of Etsuko's clear skies and snowy mountain sides, for it was only a few days until the coal-tainted air had stolen the fresh whiteness from our snow. But the happiness of the children was not spoiled. Daruma-samas stood on every lawn, and the streets were filled with boys throwing snowballs. One day from my window I saw a lively snow fight in which a group of besiegers pressed hard with a heroic few bravely dodging behind two barrels and a board with snow piled beneath. When the besiegers called a truce and ran around the corner for reinforcements, I pushed up my window and clapped as hard as I could. The boys had a good time, but as I watched their soiled tracks in the snow and the smoky colour of the bowls, my mind went to Ishi's stores of the snow battles held in the courtyard of the old mansion at Nagaoka during the first years of Mother's life there. In those days, in the daimyo household of even small castle towns, was based on the customs of the lords and ladies in the court of the shogun, and in less degree it was as luxurious as it was frivolous. Occasionally, when the winter season was late, the first snows that fell were light and dry. On the morning after such a snow had fallen, when the air was full of the cool sunshine of Etsuko and the ground white and sparkling, the men would lay aside their swords and with their pleated skirts gracefully caught up on their sides, run out of to the big open court. Soon they would be joined by the women, their gay trains looped over their scarlet skirts and their long bright sleeves held back with gay cords. No one wore wooden shoes or even sandals, for that would mar the purity of the snow, but with only the white-footed mitten on their feet, with bare hands and tinkling hairpins, all joined in the battle of the snowballs. There was running with laughter and merriment, and the air filled with flying and breaking balls through which could be seen the tossing of bright sleeves and dodging black heads powdered with snow. Our old servants often told me of those gay scenes, and Baya, the oldest of them all, would solemnly shake her head from side to side and sigh over the fact that Etsubo's enjoyment must consist only of climbing the snow hills piled in the streets and of racing with sister on snowshoes as we went to and from school. The children of my American neighborhood had no snowshoe races, but there was great excitement over coasting. Ours was a hilly suburb, and almost every lawn had at least one curving slope, but the snow was thin and no one wanted the grass worn off or beaten down. Of course, the sidewalks were cleaned and the streets were forbidden. The older boys had discovered a few long slopes and monopolized them, but the smaller children could only stand around and watch unless some big brother or kind friend would occasionally take pity and give a ride. One day I saw a group of 4 or 5 little girls with 2 red sleds standing by our iron gates and looking wistfully up at the long slope of our slide lawn. It would ruin the appearance of the whole place for them to be allowed to make a brown track there, I said to Mother. It's not the appearance, Etsu, Mother replied. Probably all the track those little fellows would make would not kill the grass, but it's too dangerous. They would have to bump over 2 gravel paths and end abruptly at the top of the stone wall. The battlements are not high, and the sleds might leap over onto the outside walk 4 feet below. I should be afraid to risk it. That afternoon, as Mother and I were walking to a meeting of the ladies' club, we passed the home of Dr. Miller. His lawn was small, but it was one of the prettiest and best kept in our neighborhood. The hill began at the roadway and swept in a straight, rather steep slope, ending in a level stretch. At least a dozen children were gathered there, among them the forlorn little group with the 2 red sleds that I had seen in the morning. A long, smooth track had already been worn on which every movement of a sled went down laden with a squealing, shrieking mass of hunched-up little figures. And on an uphill path beside the track, a line of rosy-cheeked, rosy-nosed, panting coasters were pulling their sleds and shouting, not for any reason at all except that they were having the best time of any coasters in the world. Day after day, as long as the snow lasted, that hill was reserved for the little folks, and every child that went gliding down the smooth slide and every one that came struggling up the broken path had laughter in their eyes, happiness in the heart, and hidden somewhere within a growing germ of unselfishness, kindness, and godliness that had been planted there by that kind act of a man who could see from the viewpoint of a child. It was like my father to have done that kind deed. Afterward, I never saw Dr. Miller, even to pass him on the street, that I did not look to see if behind his fine, grave, intellectual face I could not see the heart of my father. I had not seen it, but I know it is there, and that some day on the other side of the Sanzu River, those 2 beautiful souls will be friends. January brought to Matsuo and me a quiet celebration of our own. For weeks before, the letters from Japan had been coming more frequently, and occasionally the postman would hand in a package wrapped in oil paper and sealed with the oval stamp of Uncle Otani's house, or the big square one of Inagaki. One of these packages contained a thin sash of soft white cotton, each end of which had been dipped in rouge, and also 2 emblems of congratulations, baby stalks of rice dough, one white and one red. These were mother's gifts for the 5-month ceremony, a special celebration observed by expectant parents on that date. My thoughtful, loving, faraway mother. The tears came to my eyes as I explained it all to my dear American mother, who, in sweet understanding of the sacred ceremony, asked how to prepare everything according to the Japanese custom. At this celebration, beside the husband and wife, only 2 women members of 2 families are present. The young father-to-be sits beside his wife, and the sash is passed through the sleeves of his garment from left to right. Then it is properly adjusted around the wife. From then on, she is called a lady of retirement, and her food, exercise, amusements, and reading are all of a character called education for the coming. The gay light balls of many-coloured silk thread which are seen in American shops belong to this time. In the package with the sash was a charm card from my good Ishi. To obtain it, she had made a pilgrimage of 2 days to the temple of Kishibojin, demon of the mother heart, believing sincerely that the bit of paper with its mysterious symbols would protect me from every evil. According to an ancient legend, there lived in the time of the Buddha a mother of many children, who was so poor that she could not obtain food for them, and in helpless misery saw them starving. At last her agony became so great that it changed her loving mother heart into that of a demon. Every night she roamed the country stealing little babes, so that in some uncanny way belonging to the demon law, their nourishment might be transferred to her own children. Her name became a horror to the world. The wise Buddha, knowing that however many children a woman may have, she always loves the youngest with special tenderness, took her babe and hid it in his begging bowl. Hearing the child's voice but not being able to trace it, the mother was wild with distress and grief. "Listen," said the merciful Buddha, restoring the infant to her arms. "You have 1,000 children, while most women have but 10, yet you mourn bitterly for the loss of one. Think of the other aching hearts with the sympathy you feel for your own." The mother, thankfully clasping the babe to her breast, saw with the tiny arms a pomegranate and recognized it as a miracle fruit whose never withering freshness can nourish the world. Remorse and gratitude healed her heart, and she vowed to become forever a loving guardian to little children. This is why in all Kishibo temples the goddess of the altar is a demon-faced woman surrounded by children and standing in the midst of draperies and decorations of pomegranate. Those recollections flooded my mind as I sat stitching on dainty wee garments, into every one of which I breathed a prayer that my baby might be a boy. I wanted a son, not only because every Japanese family believes it the most desirable that the name should be carried on without adoption, but also for the selfish reason that both Matsuo's family and my own would look upon me with more pride were I the mother of a son. Neither Matsuo nor I had, to any great extent, the feeling that women is inferior to man, which has been so common a belief among all classes in Japan, but law and custom being what they were, it was such a serious inconvenience, yes, calamity, to have no son, that congratulations always fell more readily from the lips when the firstborn was a boy. Little girls were always welcome in Japanese homes. Indeed, it was a great sorrow to have all sons and no daughter, a calamity second only to having all daughters and no son. The laws of our family system were planned in consideration for customs which themselves were based on ancient beliefs, all of which were wise and good for their time. But as the world moves on and the ages overlap each other, there comes intervals when we climb haltingly, and this means martyrdom to the advanced, Nevertheless, perhaps it is wiser and kinder to the puzzled many for the advanced few to accommodate themselves somewhat to fading beliefs, instead of opposing them too bitterly, unless it should be a matter of principle. For we are climbing slowly, but climbing. Nature does not hasten, and Japanese are nature's pupils. Mother had a magic touch with flowers, and when spring came, the crimson rambler that formed a heavy brocade curtain on one side of our veranda was thick with tiny buds. One morning I had gone to the door to see Matsuo off, and I was wondering how soon the tiny roses would bloom when I was joined by Mother. "There are hundreds of buds here," I said. "This will be a bower of rich beauty some day. How much we Japanese miss because of superstition. Roses do not look beautiful to us because they have harmful thorns." "And how much joy you have because of traditions," said Mother, smiling. "In the poem you taught me last night, the sacred lotus that bravely lifts its snowy head in purity and beauty, although its roots are buried in earthly mire, holds a lesson of pride and inspiration. Have you another blossom that is a teacher?" "The modest plum," I answered quickly, "that blossoms on snow-laden branches is a bridal flower because it teaches courage and endurance." "And how about the cherry?" asked Mother. "Oh, that has an important meaning," I replied. "The quick-falling cherry that lives but a day and dies with destiny unfulfilled is the brave spirit of a samurai youth, always ready his fresh young strength to offer to his lord." "Bravo!" Mother cried, clapping her hands. "This is a real, albeit a second-rate poetry contest that you and I are having. Do you know any more flower poems?" "Oh yes, morning glories," and I rapidly recited in Japanese. "In the dewy freshness of the morning, they smile respectful greetings to the goddess of the sun." "Oh, Mother, this is just like Japan, the way you and I are doing now. Japanese people often gather a group of friends and write poems. They meet at a flower viewing festival and hang poems on the flowery branches, or at a moon-gazing party where they sit in the light of the moon and make poems. There's one place where the moonlight falls on a plain of rice fields, and from the mountainside the silvery reflection can be seen in every separate field. It is wonderful, and then everybody goes home feeling quiet and peaceful and with new thoughts." "Ah!" exclaimed Mother, starting quickly towards the door, adding as she looked back over her shoulder, "Our poetry contest has given me a new thought." And she disappeared within the house. Our conversation had reminded her of a package of morning glory seeds that a friend had sent when she learned that a Japanese lady was living with her. "I had almost forgotten about them," said Mother, returning with a trowel in her hand. "These were gathered from the vines which my friend had grown from seeds that came from Japan. She says the blossoms are wonderful, 4 and 5 inches across. Where shall we plant them? We must choose some appropriate spot for the little grand seeds of a Japanese ancestor." "I know exactly the place," I cried, delighted, and leading Mother to our old-fashioned well, I told her the legend of the maiden who went to a well to draw water, and finding a morning glory tendril twined about the handle of the bucket, went away rather than break the tender vine. Mother was pleased, and she planted the seed around the well curb, while I softly hummed over and over the old poem. "The morning glory tendril has changed my heart. Let it be. I'll beg water of my neighbor." We watched the vines eagerly as they reached out strong arms and climbed steadily upwards. Mother often said, "The coming of the blossom and of the baby will not be far apart." One morning I saw from my window Mother and Clara standing by the well. They were looking at the vines and talking excitedly. I hurried downstairs and across the lawn. The blossoms were open but were pale, half-sized weaklings, not resembling at all the royal blossoms we treasure so dearly in Japan. Then I remembered having read that Japanese flowers do not like other lands, and after the first year gradually fade away. With a superstitious clutch at my heart, I thought of my selfish prayer for a son and vowed to be gratefully content with either a boy or a girl, if only the little one bore no pitiful trace of the transplanting. And then the baby came, well and sweet and strong, upholding in her perfect babyhood the traditions of both America and Japan. I forgot that I had ever wanted a son, and Matsuo, after his first glimpse of his little daughter, remembered that he had always liked girls better than boys. Whether the paper charm of Kishibo Jin was of value or not, my good Ishi loving thought for me was a boon to the heart during those first weeks when I so longed for her wisdom and her love, and yet it was well that she was not with me, for she could never have fitted into our American life. The gentle, time-taking ways of a Japanese nurse crooning to a little bundle of crepe and brocade swinging in its silken hammock on her back would never have done for my active baby, who so soon learned to crow with delight and clutch disrespectfully at her father's head as he tossed her aloft in his strong arms. We decided to bring the baby up with all the healthful freedom given to an American child, but we wanted her to have a Japanese name. The meaning of Matsuo's name was pine, the emblem of strength. Mine was rice field, the emblem of usefulness. Therefore, said Matsuo, the baby is already a combination of strength and usefulness, but she must have beauty also. So let us give her the name of our kind of American mother, which translated means flower. And if we use the old-fashioned termination, I cried with delight, it will mean foreign fields or strange land. Hanano! Flower in a strange land, cried Matsuo, clapping his hands. Nothing could be better. Mother consented, and thus it was decided. End of chapter 21. If you are enjoying these audiobooks, please take the time to subscribe, press like, leave a comment, or share this channel with your friends who also enjoy listening to audiobooks. Thank you.